And she said, without you firing me and making me look at my life and be honest about it and putting me in that position, I would I'm 10 steps up from where I was dispatching for you at the little company in Portland, Oregon, as opposed to the big national trucking firm. Tell us about from suck to I love the stuff you have. From Suck to Success, a guide to extraordinary entrepreneurship. Tell us about it.
Well, that's why I'm so glad to be here, because I really wrote the book for people who are in your audience. It's for the startup or the early stage entrepreneur, or even that entrepreneur who maybe is struggling. They've been around 10 years like I was before I kind of got my act together. And it really breaks down what entrepreneurship's really like. And I tell all through stories. I talk about my story. I've been going $600,000 in debt to the Inc. 5,000 6 times. Brian Scudamore of 1-800-GOT-JUNK contributed. Nigel Bennett of AquaGuard contributed. These are internationally known companies, friends of mine, who decided to, quit talking about how great it is to be an entrepreneur, how easy it is. They talk about how hard it is, how challenging it is. So the first half of the book, first 4 chapters are all about the mindset of the entrepreneur. It's figuring out where you are, what's holding you back. At the end of every chapter is an active learning cycle exercise, so people can identify with the stories and what they can do to get out of there. Chapter 4, I talk about the E4 process we use to get people unstuck. Then we move into action steps they can take, so that now it's just not, once you get your mindset right, now the second half of the hard work begins, focusing on margin, focusing on employees, because employees are always the differentiator. What can you do to get those? So ultimately, by the end of the book, we can create a life by design where it's work-life integration, so that you're the entrepreneur, but you're also a parent, you're also a partner, you're also a human being, not just an 80-hour work machine.
So almost a step-by-step kind of manual for the things that you might run into, or that so many businesses run into, and the way to get out of them using practical experience learned, not something that was theoretical.
Oh, there's certainly any theory I talk about. I give, certainly I want to give full, I use a lot of work from Dr. Danny Friedland, and I use his mindset work, and I credit him throughout. But this is all stuff I've done, stuff other people have done, because I think, it's one thing to be professorial and to speak from a top down to the masses. I'm just going to stand in the same room with you and say, hey, I know what it's like. I've been there. It's tough. Here's what I went through. Here's what other people do. Here's what my clients do. I mean, I have a client of mine who, once he got unstuck about firing an employee, and he didn't fire this employee because he didn't have the power to do it as a CEO. He didn't do it because he told himself, nice people don't fire people. Once we got him repivoted, his revenue grew 70%. His profits, because he bought into Margin Magic, grew 500%. Because he got this guy out of his way, put someone in there to do the job the right way so his business could grow. And so those are the kind of stories. So that everything's based in experience. It's not just all theoretical in some book I read somewhere else and I regurgitated it.
And that's the value of it. And along those lines, again, one of the bigger issues for me, and I was waiting to ask you this question, is a perfect time. When it comes to business and even management, let's say somebody was up and coming and they want to move their way through a company and they want to, make more money and get promoted. And I say the thing that holds so many people back I've probably had 10,000 plus employees in my 25 years in business. And the biggest impediment for me, or one of the biggest, I should say, is passive aggressiveness. That make that firing so bad in your head that you just figure out 20 different ways to avoid it. The problem with that is when you actually get around, after you've put yourself through all that pain and misery, and you get around to finally doing it, it's never as bad as you think it is. It's never works out the way that you build it up in your head. And you alluded to that somewhat, and I will attribute passive aggressiveness to his reluctance to fire people. I see that as a major issue. I preach this all of the time. To be aware of being passive aggressive, because you just can't turn that off. A lot of us are born that way. I was certainly born that way. My dad was very passive aggressive, and I have to physically or mentally tell myself, maybe not quite so much, I'm 52, but when I was 35, 40, pick that phone up and make that difficult phone call, make that difficult decision, because your brain is programmed to put that off and to make it into something it's not.
Yeah, basically, you're absolutely right. So there's two things that happen. One, we allow artificial harmony to occur and thrive in our organizations. So by avoiding the difficult conversations, by letting the chaos creators continue to be with your team, not only is that employee creating problems or underperforming, everybody else on the team sees that.
Yeah, good point.
And that's a reflection upon us as the leaders. That's the first thing. Secondly, we get a whole lot further in business and in life by leaning into, not away from the uncomfortable. That's where the growth takes place. So if we need to have an uncomfortable conversation with somebody, then if we can do that in such a way where we actually learn and grow from it versus the dreaded, unfortunate, uncomfortable conversation, it goes a whole lot better. Because what we do without having the conversation, kind of like you allude to, they prelude to the conversation. All we're doing is filling in a narrative in our head. And that narrative in our head, it doesn't ever go like, well, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to let Jerry go today, and he's going to give me a high five, give me a hug and thank me for the opportunity. That's not the narrative we say. I'm going to have to go fire Jerry, and then everybody in his department's going to be upset. And then I'm going to get his wife's going to call me, and then there's going to be a lawsuit, and then. It's just easy to let Jerry just kind of just be in his own corner. We're going to let Jerry just kind of go on. Here's what an employer or a CEO, an entrepreneur can really double down on. If we're going to have a difficult conversation, we're going to have a tough conversation with somebody, know why you're doing it around the core values that are stated to the organization. Know why you're having this conversation. If Jerry's violating the core values of the company, be able to explain to him clearly why it's not working. Be able to go in and have that versus, I just don't like you, or you just rubbed me the wrong way. Well, that's maybe a you issue that you need to work through. I just had a client go through this. She was really struggling, having to let somebody go. But then she realized that they have 10 core values. He was violating 4 of them. Right. It became a very easy conversation. She explained it to him in the termination. He owned it. He agreed. He felt bad about it, but he just couldn't help himself because, wherever we go, there we are.
The other thing is too, that I think people who have to fire, managers and business owners, don't think about it. If you don't think it's a good fit, it's probably not a good fit for the other person. And they're in the same position you are. They're just not willing to make that decision. I've had one in particular, but I've had 4 or 5 over the course of my career. But one that's really stood out, I had a dispatcher, and she just wasn't very good at dispatch for trucks. And so I had to let her go. And she worked for me for a long time. She was dedicated, always showed up, all of the things that you would look for, but she just couldn't do that job. And that's the job she wanted to do. So I had to let her go. And it was not amicable. She stormed out the door. She came back 3 years later. She had moved. I was living in Portland, Oregon. She had moved to the Midwest, and she was now a trucking dispatcher for a huge national trucking company. And she said, without you firing me and making me look at my life and be honest about it and putting me in that position, I would I'm 10 steps up from where I was dispatching for you at the little company in Portland, Oregon, as opposed to the big national trucking firm. And so I've never forgotten that it's not always negative. It's not the interaction can be, and it's hard to fire people, but sometimes those people want out too. And they're in the same position you are. They can't quit and you can't fire them.
Well, and they can't quit because then they have to go home and explain to somebody that they quit without having another job. So that's a tough call. Versus if you let them go, then they can go home and they can be the victim, they can be the martyr, and oh, woe is me, Jerry's mean, he fired me, big bad Jerry. What the reality typically is, when we fire someone, 95% of the time, and when I was working on the book, we got over 6,000 people jobs, and I personally fired over 600 people. So the reality is I can think of all that time, less than 5 people who I felt genuinely sorry for firing, because once we saw the reasons why, once we understood their performance and what was happening, or their attendance issues, or what have you, or whatever the reasons were, 95% of people who get fired earn it. They know it. They may not tell you, and they're not going to always tell us. But like in your example, you actually freed her up to get herself unstuck and cut the cord from the security that she had with you. There's often comfort in discomfort too. So she freed herself up. She was able to go on, grow up, look in the mirror, own her part in that, and get better at it. You actually did her a huge favor because you freed her up to go be a much better employee for someone else, not on your time. And it probably ended up being addition by subtraction in your company. Are you happy to move her on? And she was actually able to go out and make a better life for herself. So 3 years later, there is no loser in the conversation.